the world was falling apart. Fascist Nazi shock troops of the Third Reich and their blitzkrieg had spread across Europe and northern Africa and were marching their eastern front deep into the heart of Russia. The Empire of Japan was making its conquest of the Pacific reality. 65 million human lives would be lost. 11 million would eventually be systematically exterminated by an evil war machine like the world had never seen before. To gain a foothold into Europe and take on the armies of Hitler's Nazi Third Reich, the world needed a new elite type of soldier. The paratrooper was that soldier. Changing Hearts and Minds welcomes you to a special series dedicated to the greatest generation, and specifically the well-known story that inspired the best-selling book and HBO miniseries, Band of Brothers. Join me, Jeff Adamick, veteran of the U.S. Army where I served as a paratrooper in the 82nd, Ranger in the 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, and finally as a Green Beret in 3rd Special Forces Group, as I welcome fellow veterans, other podcast hosts and personalities, and some very special guests to honor the true story, book, and television series about the greatest generation's most honored story of sacrifice, service, and leadership in the face of overwhelming evil. Lessons in Leadership, the men and history of Easy Company. Hey there, everybody. Hey, first I want to thank everyone for coming on this journey with me over the last, God knows, 4 or 5 months. It's been quite a long time for me doing all this stuff, and I want to tell you guys that I really do appreciate every single one of you who stuck around from the very first episode to the very last episode. Really was a journey and a labor of love to get this thing done, and I really do want to thank especially not just the actors, the writers, producers, and everyone that made the show Band of Brothers, but also and especially the actual men of Easy Company. There's no replacing these guys as far as being heroes and mentors and role models to look up to, especially for our younger generations, to find people who can really dig down and find what they need to do to get the work done. Just like I promised you guys over the entire last 10 episodes, I here have the unabridged, unedited, and unsolicited full interview of Mr. Dale Dye and myself, which you are going to hear right now. And I just want to tell you guys that I really thank you guys for coming along again, and I hope you guys stick around and check out all those new episodes of Changing Hearts and Minds that'll come out right after all this stuff is done. So, with no more waiting, here you guys are, the complete and totally unedited Dale Dye and Jeff Adamick. Thanks, guys. Today's guest, real big deal for us here on Changing Hearts and Minds and the Changer POV Network. If you don't know his name, again, you're going to learn about it, and I will give you crap about not knowing who this guy is. But our guest today is Dale Dye. Dale Dye is from Missouri, and he enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps in 1964. His unit was one of the very first to deploy to Vietnam in 1965. He saw quite a bit of combat action during his tours in Vietnam, but he also rose from an enlisted Marine to an NCO to a warrant officer, and eventually was commissioned as an officer. He would serve as a captain in the Marines before retiring in 1984. Once he got out, guys, he started Warriors, Inc., which is a company that I'm going to actually read to you guys directly from the website what Warriors, Inc. was about. Captain Dale Dye came to Hollywood with a vision. He had a single mission in mind: to change how American civilians viewed the common grunt. Having been around infantrymen all his life, and having been one himself, he knew that the majority are intelligent, creative, and full of heart, and that the image of the dumb cannon fodder blindly following orders not only was not true, but it was a grave disservice to those brave servicemen who had risked and often gave their lives so that our nation could survive and prosper. Guys, today Dale Dye is one of the most recognizable names and faces in film and television. When it comes to accurate and inspiring combat and military stories, he's the guy that we always think of. He's a favorite to all veterans who always can spot his influence on the projects he's a part of. From Platoon to Saving Private Ryan and TV shows Band of Brothers in the Pacific, each of which is commonly known to be a favorite among veterans for its realism and ability to capture the heart and culture of grunts in combat. Dale Dye served in the Vietnam War and the Lebanese Civil War, and has been awarded the Bronze Star Medal with V Device for Valor, 3 Purple Hearts, 2 Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medals with V Device, Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal with V Device, Meritorious Service Medal, and the Joint Service Commendation Medal. Welcome to the show, Mr. Dale Dye.
Thank you, Jeff. I don't know whether to go to sleep or stand up and salute here. Thank you very much for that introduction. That's great. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh yes, sir. No, well, thank you. First of all, thank you for your service and for, honest to God, for being a guy that actually went to Hollywood, and in my opinion, and a lot of opinions of guys like me, changed the way that film and television made combat stories to actually be consumable by the actual veterans who had seen combat. So we're just very happy to have you on. And
well, that whole thing, Jeff, was entirely the mission. I mean, I had no idea, frankly, how hard it was going to be or what kind of resistance I was going to encounter. But that was the agenda, and it was the agenda when I started, and it remains the agenda today. I just think that Hollywood needs to recognize and do better by those of us who've worn the uniform and borne the burden of war. And as I can get that done, I'm delighted. I can't always get it done, but I'm batting pretty good with things like Band of Brothers and Saving Private Ryan and some of the ones you mentioned. So I'm delighted to be with you, and you can ask me anything, and I'll try to answer for you.
Oh yeah, well, first of all, when you say that you try to get it done, believe me that in most of our eyes, you're not only getting it done, but you're getting it done with zeal and doing it right. Because as I said, you are very your influence on films is pretty much recognizable across the board. So having said that, let's get into some of the questions we got for you guys. So as you know, we're doing it's going to be a 10-part series on Band of Brothers. It's going to be a special series that's released all at one time for Changing Hearts and Minds. And we wanted to get some guys that were actually part of the production to come in. And for us, you are a great addition to that group of people. You're going to hear, when you actually do hear the series, you're going to hear a lot of different veterans who are going to pay homage to the work that you guys did on Band of Brothers, not just to the guys that actually performed the actions that Band of Brothers is based on, but making it pretty much one of the most pivotal shows in film history and movie history, in my opinion, that really captures the essence of what happened during those times. So having said that, can you talk to us about your method of preparing the cast for playing the soldiers through Warriors Inc. and what you guys do?
Sure. Look, a long time ago, I had watched every military movie there ever was, Jeff, and they were always missing something, from the simplest stupid mistakes like carrying, an M16 rifle in a World War II movie, to more complicated things like how we talk to each other and how we relate to each other. And I kept seeing the title in the credits, technical advisor, and it'd be some retired guy, and I said, well, how in the hell did he let stuff like that get by? What's going on? So I came to Hollywood to try to figure out what the gap was, and I very quickly found out that the Hollywood establishment. And, very, very few of them ever wore a uniform, or for that matter, knew anybody who ever wore a uniform. And so they didn't consider things about our heart and our mind, who we were, as important parts of the dramatic storytelling process. They just wanted to know, is this uniform right? And now get away and go over there and sit down and go to sleep, and we'll wake you up when we want to know which side the ribbons go on.
Right.
So I said, well, no wonder. So I said, this has to be fixed. And as I moved along, I began to meet a few actors, people who really were into the process and who were creative, artistic type of people. And I said, how can you guys screw it up so bad? And they said, what do you mean? We had a guy told us how to carry the weapon and how to wear our gear. And I said, yeah, but that's not it. What you're missing is the heart and soul of a soldier, of who we are, how we relate to each other, how we talk, how we carry ourselves, how we think, what our passions are, how we rely on the guy to our right and our left, and we must have faith that he's relying on us, we're relying on him, and he won't let us down. And they just looked at me, with a kind of a blank expression like, huh? And I said, no, that's really the essence. That's the soul of it. And so I began to think it over, and I said, well, look, how can I fix this? Assuming I ever get a chance, which I finally did in platoon, how can I fix this? And the answer was very simple. And every GI, every soldier, every Marine, every sailor, every airman, every Coast Guardsman will recognize the answer immediately, and that's training. But you have to do this training in extremis. They're not going to give me 6, 8, 10 weeks to train these guys as we would do on an entry level in one of the services.
Right.
I've got to find a way to take 5 or 6 days or 2 weeks or 1 week or whatever they'll give me. And I have to teach these guys how we think, how we act, how we relate to each other. And so what occurred to me was, look, if I'm forced to do that in that brief period of time, then I've got to cut away all of the crapola. I've got to put these guys in extremis. I've got to make them experience some of the things that we experience, things like utter exhaustion, things like no sleep, things like having to protect the next guy while he sleeps, things about what it's really like to carry heavy weight and hump hills. I had enough of this business of having styrofoam in the pack. That's not going to work with me. I don't play that game. So I developed this what people call the Captain Die method, which is I'm going to take your dumb ass and I'm going to wear you out. I'm going to PT you or whatever else I can do until you're dragging. I'm going to smoke you. And then I probably have your attention. At that point, you're probably thinking, all I really need to do is not piss off that old white-haired guy. And if I can just do that, I'll get through this. What they didn't understand, and what I understood from my own personal experience, was once I've got them at that point, they're dry sponges. I can now teach. And I can not only teach academically, but I can teach psychologically. I can teach emotionally, because now they will understand it. They will understand how we live and the hardships with which we have to put. And so what happened is there was this Captain Die method that developed. And it began with platoon, in which they gave me 33 actors, and I took them into the jungles of the Philippines, the mountains of the Philippines up above Luzon, on the northwest portion of Luzon, up in the jungle mountains. And I made them live as we lived in Vietnam for 3 weeks. And of course, that show won 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. And I was fortunate enough to be recognized as a big part of that, a big part of what made it such a great movie.
Right.
And so I began to I will get around to answering your question.
Oh no, you're fine. Fine, take your time, sir.
I began to tweak and to change and to modify and to improve that method so that I could do it even better in an even briefer period of time. And by the time we got to Band of Brothers, I recognized that I had the way to do this. And so Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks called me in and they said, Dale, we want you to do this. We want you to do what you normally do. But what do you need? And I said, I want, because these guys are seen from their very formation, Easy Company 506, first of the 506th, 101st Airborne Division in World War II. They're given, we see them from the time they assemble, from the time they go into basic training, all the way toward the end of the war. And so I said, I need to replicate that experience in some fashion. And I said, I want 2 weeks, and I'll take them, by the time I graduate them, by the time I bring them out, they will know what it was like to be a young paratrooper soldier in World War II. And so I designed this program that began with a a long series of living in the barracks and actually I used a barracks because that's what they would have used at Toccoa
Right.
when they were originally formed, at a place called Longmoor Camp, which is very near Aldershot, which is the home of the British Army. And I was completely isolated. There was a fence around the area, completely isolated. I had our own cooks, and we fed them, and we PT'd every morning. We humped hard all the time. We worked at night so that they would get used to that. And what happened is they began to gel. They began to know each other. They began to become a paratrooper rifle company circa 1944. And that's what I wanted. So as we worked toward the end of that training period, I made arrangements with the British Army's #1 parachute school at Bryce Norton Royal Air Force Base. And I took them up and I put them through a complete ground parachute training regimen. And the culmination of it, I couldn't actually get them out the door of an aircraft because the insurance guys were going nuts. But I got them off of a 60-foot tower. And when I brought them back to Longmoor, I conducted a graduation exercise, pinned wings on them, and said, now, we are going out to do one of the most important missions in your life, and that is to celebrate the lives and the accomplishments of the real men that you are portraying. And you will do it right, and you will do it with pride, and you will do it with the same panache and dash that they did in June of 1944. And so it worked magically, as I knew it would. And I'll never forget Steven Spielberg coming by with Tom Hanks in tow to take a look at them toward the end of training. And he just looked at me and he said, "What have you done?" and I didn't know exactly what he meant. I mean, have I screwed this up? I didn't think I did. And he was just all smiles, and he said, "They are them." And I said, "Yes, sir, they are them. And I'm going to be right at their shoulder, leading them all the way through this to see that they remain them until we get this thing made." So that's a long story, but that's essentially how I did it.
No, that's great. And the thing that you see, and I know that with you had already gone through this with Tom Hanks in Saving Private Ryan.
Right.
So he had seen the benefit firsthand. Much like a guy who they see basic training on TV or any of the different versions of it, and they're like, I don't understand what's the necessity of being treated so poorly and being yelled at and everything. And it's not until, and sometimes I think not until you become an NCO in the military do you realize the importance of that type of training as far as building a team and bringing guys together. And like you said, you break them down to their base survivalist instincts,
right.
And then
lowest common denominator.
And you've got them then to build them up from that point, and they build up together as a team. And that building as a team does really make them the same. And I think where you get it right the most is that whole attitude of these are those guys, because anybody that goes through that and they go through that as a group together, they always come out the other side. Always talk.
I mean, look, and I sorry to interrupt you, but
no, go ahead.
The idea is basically this. I recognize that you can train anybody to walk and act like a soldier. But the real magic is in understanding the heart and the mind of that soldier and how he reacts and why he reacts and how you relate to each other and how you rely on each other. And so that was if there's any magic to it, it was that. I wanted to get beyond the exterior. I wanted to get into their head and into their guts where emotion lives, into their hearts where spirit lives. And those are all, warm and fuzzy, touchy-feely words, but that's the real deal.
Right.
And that's what makes a veteran. That's what makes a soldier of any ilk, of any uniform, different than anybody else in the world, because they understand that. And I wanted the guys in Band of Brothers to understand that, and they did.
Yes, they certainly did. So going on, when you have, all right, so in Saving Private Ryan is always a good example of this. You had one guy, you had Captain Miller, Tom Hanks. He was going to be the leader of that group of men. So in Band of Brothers, we have such a plethora and almost a overabundance of leaders in that group of guys, from Major Winters, First Sergeant Lipton, Captain Spears, Buck Compton, all these guys. Those were leaders in their different ways, but all leaders. Did you approach the set of dealing with these guys differently to get that leadership out of them, any different than you had with other groups of guys you were teaching, where you only had one or two leaders that were going to arise out of that group of men you were training?
As training progressed, I did make I did single them out. But to begin with, I wanted them to be, part of the reason they were such good leaders, frankly, was because they understood their men. They understood what was going on with their guys.
Right.
And so as we began training, that's what I did. I said, first you're going to learn to be a private. And then you can learn to be a corporal, maybe. And then, assuming you understand all of that, I will begin to focus on you as an officer or as a senior NCO.
Right.
And that's what I did. Fortunately, I had my staff of Warriors Inc. guys. And so while they handled certain things, I was able to drift off among the officers, with Damian Lewis and some of the others, and say, come here. I want to tell you a few officer things, things that I want you to understand. With Lipton, because I'd been a senior NCO.
Right.
I pulled him aside and I said, listen, here's the difference between NCO business and officer business. And I said, and you don't want to let them get in your business, and you don't want to get in their business. And I explained what that business was. So as they began to get the basics, as they began to get the basic understanding of the structure and the mentality of a combat unit, I began to single them out. I began to pull them out and give them individual training and kind of work in their characters, because they'd all done terrific homework.
Yeah,
we were fortunate that some of the veterans were alive.
Right.
And they were able to talk to them. Not during training. I didn't allow any of that. There was absolutely no outside communication whatsoever.
Right.
Nor is there ever in any of my training. No phones, no nothing.
So it's much like the same type of isolation based unit cohesion training that we ourselves have been through, whether it's basic training, boot camp, ranger school, that kind of stuff. And to me, that's what it reminds me of the most is like a small ranger school for these guys, where they build up from being nobody to being the leader of these patrols.
That's a good example. Yeah.
So
now, anyway,
the
point I'm making, quite frankly, is that I knew all of these things. What I did was to massage them into their characters. Say things like, well, Winters probably isn't that kind of guy. He probably wouldn't react in that fashion. So when we got to those character specific things, they were really hungry for it, because they're actors and they really wanted to do a good job. They now had the basics. They understood much more, frankly, about what the live veterans had told them,
right,
than they did before. Now they saw it. Now they understood it. And so it was easy then to take those individuals and massage them up into leadership positions. And as we began in the final days of the training, we ran missions, actual training missions in the field. Basic stuff, assault on a fortified position and that sort of thing. And they led. Myself and my cadre stood back, and we let them plan it, we let them lead it, and we let them do it. So they began to get that feeling of what it's like to plan it and carry it out.
It's fantastic. It really is. It's remarkable that it's such a basic idea that I think is you probably think the same thing I have. Is like, why did nobody figure this out earlier? You know,
Well, they were afraid of Hollywood hubris. There were two elements. You want me to talk about that for a little bit?
please go right ahead. I'd love to hear it.
All right. When I first came to Hollywood and I said, "Look, I'm a creative guy. I'm a storyteller. I know how to do this." They said, "Well, that's impossible. You couldn't be." Nobody who wore a uniform, who was in the military, you don't go in the military if you're a creative person, if you're a filmmaker,
right?
And that's what I faced. They actually believed that, the establishment out here. So first of all, I had to prove that I was indeed that sort of creative person.
Right.
That was one thing. And the other thing was that they didn't think anybody in the audience cared. So what? Nobody's going to know if that's the right weapon or not. Who cares? Just it shoots, right? Get it out there.
Right.
And I said, guys, not only are you talking to a batch of, a generation of Vietnam guys who do know, but you're talking to people who are tied into their media saturated. They know these things. You can't make the presumption that nobody gives a crap.
Right.
They do, and the details are important. So it was those two battles that I had to defeat. But those two problems were the reason that nobody had done it before I did it, because everybody would look at that and simply say, well, okay, I guess that's the way it is in Hollywood. Well, I said horseshit. Excuse my language.
No. We're an explicit show, sir. You're well allowed. Just go ahead.
I'm not buying that, and I don't quit. I'm not a quitter. I will take this objective. And so in spite of all of those roadblocks and in spite of all of those problems, I just kept at it. I fixed bayonets and went at it.
Right.
And I got that one break, and that one break was an Academy Award winner, and nothing succeeds in Hollywood like success.
Do you think, and this is a question on that one question, do you think that Oliver Stone's experiences in the military and the fact that he was actually a soldier himself, do you think that helped along with him giving you that opportunity where he maybe kind of knew already that you were saying the truth?
Oh, he did. He did, absolutely. He the minute I pitched it to him that this is what I wanted to do, that I wanted them to live in the jungle like we lived in the jungle, he got it immediately.
Right.
He said, yeah, that's probably right. That's probably the only way they'll really understand this. And remember, in those days, these guys, the guys we had, Charlie Sheen, Forrest Whitaker, Tom Berenger, Willem Dafoe, Johnny Depp, they weren't major names at that point.
Right.
And so, he said, yeah, they're going to need to understand who we were in order to understand this script and how to tell this story. So, yeah, absolutely, he got it, and the reason he got it is because he had been through it.
Right, and having said that, for the people listening, it is the same the other way around. As you guys who have been listening to my show for a long time know, I went to a performing arts high school in New Jersey. I tried out for Juilliard. Things didn't work out. I had to pay for college. I joined the Army, went from the 82nd Airborne Division to 2nd Ranger Battalion, and the number one thing I always ran into was, you did what in high school? How could you, who wanted to be an actor and be a singer, end up in one of the most elite units in the military? And it was always a source of poking fun at me all the time. And it was okay for me. I understood that my heart and my soul were in the military, regardless of what chosen profession I had wanted to do when I was younger. But it's the same thing. It goes back. It's both cultures are just as guilty of not understanding each other as one and the other is.
Yeah.
So
and frankly, they're unwilling sometimes to take that one step forward or back. That it's all it takes to understand. But yeah, you're right. It's the obverse of what I was running into out here. I call it Hollywood hubris, but you could call it Ranger hubris.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So did you have any way that you had to approach everything differently? Because for Platoon and Saving Private Ryan, although the events were real, they were based on real things that happened. It wasn't some made up war with some made up unit. But in Band of Brothers, you were actually dealing with real live historic figures. And so did that affect or change the way you had to teach these guys how to act? And I know you mentioned that you talked to them individually about, hey, winners wouldn't act that way. Obviously, it worked with Lipton, because I think that he's my favorite character in the movie, and I think he nails it, because I had met Captain Lipton eventually, but I met him at one point, And as soon as I met him, I'm like, God, you remind me of Donnie Wahlberg in the
Yeah.
show. Like, so they got it right. But did you have to approach that differently because of that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, look, there were things in World War II and the way things were done in World War II that, frankly, I knew there was a better way.
Right.
There was an easier way, but I couldn't take that way because it would have been a lie, and it would have cheated these guys of a valuable experience. So I had to back up. And I really had to. In fact, I spent a long time in old Army field manuals, trying to get how it was taught in those days.
Right.
And it was taught to the lowest common denominator, because a lot of those guys didn't have high school educations, and they just weren't. They weren't susceptible to the quick and dirty way we can train now.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of step-by-step ABC, 1, 2, 3 sort of training, and I had to do it. And sometimes I would stand there and grit my teeth and say, "Geez, I could do this in an hour and a half if I did." But we couldn't do that, and I didn't want to do that. When we went up to Bryce Norton to do the ground parachute training, all of the British parachutists up there said, "Oh, well, here, we just do this." I said, "No, guys, I can't do that because it wasn't the way it was done in the 1940s."
Right.
So we've got to go through this step by, and they finally just shrugged their shoulders and said, "Oh, well, what the hell," and walked away. But I got them through the swing landers and all that other sort of thing in the same way that it was taught, down at the frying pan at Fort Benning back in the 1940s. But yes, I had to modify the approach so that I didn't inject something modern, although I desperately wanted to several times.
Well, I'm sure you did. Yeah. So do you now? For those of the people that are going to be following this for the first time, Dale Dye didn't just be the technical advisor on Band of Brothers. You also played a very important part of the story itself by playing Colonel Sink, who was the commander for the 506 throughout the entirety of World War II.
My favorite role.
And as well it should be, because it's done magnificently, if I may say so myself. I mean, it's guys, for those of you who don't know things about it, and I know that sometimes you guys hear me go off on this tangent about acting and character building and everything, but I'm a storyteller myself, much like Dale is, and I take a lot out of that. But sometimes those small roles, when they're pivotal, and you can tell every time that Colonel Sink's character is on screen that something important is about to happen, because he is there as the character who is, this is important. Pay attention. Just like a colonel would be in real life. Whenever the privates see the colonel around, something's going down. We need to pay attention. Did you have any kind of specific approach to playing Colonel Sink, and did you allow yourself to be able to portray that as a leader to those actors, being a leader on and off screen, even just so you can maintain that ability to be that character?
Well, you'd be hard pressed to find a better leader than Bourbon Bob Sink, and I was tremendously into the character, and I tried to incorporate some of his activities and that sort of thing in the early training phase. But I was very lucky. I mean, I knew I was portraying somebody who is an airborne legend. I mean, there are portraits of him down at Fort Bragg, and I've seen them.
Yes, I live at Fort Bragg, so I see them all the time. Love that guy.
Right. So I knew that I had to get this right. And I was really fortunate. His daughter, Barbara Sink McClellan, was very good to me. She sent me tapes of his speeches that he'd made, so I could get that North Carolina accent correct. And I listened to him for hours until I could absolutely mimic the way he spoke. And it also helps to be from the South myself. But it was both a privilege to bring him to life on screen, and it was a bit of a burden because I really knew that I had to get this right. Everybody who knew anything about the Army Airborne knew about Bob Sink. And and I couldn't bring some cookie cutter caricature. I had to bring who this guy really was. The good part was that I've been a leader almost all of my military life, and so I understood him. I understood why he did things the way he did. I could see his philosophies. I could see his psychology. I could see how he worked. I knew what type of leader he was, and I was familiar with all of that. So it was easier on me than it would have been for somebody who'd never been a leader in the military.
Right.
But it was I felt that mantle every day that I can't get this wrong.
And I don't think you did, sir. To be honest with you, I think you nailed it on the head. I mean, I look at him and I think that guys like him and James Gavin and all these men who are the men who made the airborne what they are, so important. And every time those guys can get portrayed on screen, they deserve that kind of attention and that kind of perfection.
You talk about a new burden. In my new movie, I'm raising the funding now for a new World War II movie called No Better Place to Die, which is the 82nd on D-Day at the Lafayette Bridge fight. And in that are none other than Jumpin' Jim Gavin and Matthew Ridgway.
Oh, man, that's
great. Yeah, you talk about legends, and I'm going to bring them to life on screen. So I've got another challenge ahead of me.
Oh, I'm looking forward to that. That's great. I grew up in the 82nd. It was my first unit in the Army,
right?
And I live it. To this point, when I finally got retired from the military, we didn't move from Fort Bragg area because this is my life and all. I'm like you. I live this even though I'm no longer active.
Sure.
So that's great. I can't wait to see that because it's really
well. Listen, I had to do something for the 82nd. I mean, these guys were killing me. They were calling, look what you did for the 101st and Band of Brothers, and look what you did for the Rangers and Saving Private Ryan. When's the 82nd gonna? So finally, I said, guys, okay, I'm on it, and I'm going to try to do for them what we did for the 101st in Band of Brothers.
So I want to go down a little bit of the road. You were talking about Colonel Sink and getting that right, and how you understood what he needed, what his leadership style, because you used to be a leader. Now, I have a lot of arguments with guys, or either people who are just privates or people who don't know anything about the military. They always go after Sobel's character. Now, for me specifically, yes. Do I identify more with Winters and Carlton Lipton? Yeah, I do. But I also see the benefit of what Sobel did to build that unit into what I think so much of their initial cohesion had to do with that common denominator of Captain Sobel.
Well, you're not the only one who thinks that, Jeff. The surviving veterans that we talked to all said they wouldn't have gotten through to where they were without Sobel. They didn't like him, they hated him, but they recognized immediately that he's the guy that built Easy Company.
Right. Well, that's good to hear, because that's something I think every time I watch David Schwimmer play him, I'm like, they have no idea, the people who haven't lived through stuff like this, how important he was to
David Schwimmer impressed me. He was injured during training. And I thought, it was a knee that blew out, and I thought, well, he's through. I had to send him for medical treatment, and I said, well, he'll never make it back to jump with us. And about 3 days later, lo and behold, he showed up. He showed up on the day we were going to jump school, and he said, I'm not missing this. And, I thought originally he might be a bit of a lightweight, but he wasn't.
Right.
He wanted to do this. And when I talked to him about Schwimmer, about Sobel, he got it. He knew that he was a pariah.
Right.
And that everybody was going to hate him. And I said, how are you going to handle that? And he said, well, I'm going to handle it the way I think Sobel did. And that is keep pushing forward and keep doing what I think is correct, no matter who likes it or doesn't like it. And I said, okay, you got it. Because that's what Sobel did. And he's a tragic story.
You feel bad for him when you're watching as a former leader. That moment where he gets the company taken away from him is to me is one of the most heartbreaking parts of the first two episodes.
Yeah, it was one of the most interesting scenes I did, was having to fire him. in my office in that. But I tried to let him down as easy as I could. The interesting thing was, I knew, and David Schwimmer knew, that Sobel had later killed himself. He
Right.
committed suicide. And we could just imagine the heartbreak. And I could see David in the scene playing it. He had that in the back of his mind, that this is the pivotal incident in the man's life, and that eventually it's going to lead to his death. And I just thought he played it to a T. He really did. You didn't see any of the Friends sort of stuff in there.
No,
he played Sobel.
Yeah, he really took a step out. I think as an actor, that was really one of his best roles he's ever done.
To this day, he's still very proud of it, and he should be.
Yes, he should be. So let's talk about Easy Company and the history of it. What is your favorite storyline and favorite event from the Easy Company legacy?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, they did so many great things as part of the overall 82nd drive. What I particularly like, the initial mission that they got, taking out the artillery battery. That was difficult to choreograph because it was all done with handheld cameras. And it was really a difficult thing to do. And they approached it. We tried to shoot it. That's at Brecourt Manor. We tried to shoot it in the way that it actually happened.
Right.
And we got so close to it that that I said, I knew at that moment that we really had a tiger by the tail here in this storytelling, because so often you have to shoot things out of order, or you lose the thread of the tale that you're telling because the camera gets in the way and all that sort of thing. But in the Brecourt Manor German artillery battery assault, which happened very, very shortly after they landed.
Right. It was the next morning, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was the next morning. That I could see, and I knew inherently that was the proof. That was the proof of the pudding for Easy Company. When they pulled that off, they knew that they were a special outfit.
Right. That is the mission that is still taught at West Point to this day as the doctrinal way to take down a fortified position. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Well, it depends on the fortified position. It's certainly a doctrinal way to take down a damn artillery battery. I'll say that.
Right.
And it was really, really hard because that battery had been there for a long time. They had all kinds of defensive positions and trenches dug, and Easy Company guys had to get in there and just winkle them out by running up and down those trenches and then taking each individual tube as they went on down the battery firing line. So that made me smile the way it must have made Dick Winters smile when it was done back in 1944. That'll always stand out as kind of one of my favorite pieces.
Yeah, such an important aspect of the Easy Company story. And I if I'm correct, and I will do my background to double check this and I'll edit it out if I'm wrong, but I believe that is the single most award-winning mission they had done, because I know Dick Winters had won the Distinguished Service Cross, second highest award, combat award you can get, and Buck Compton and Garnier both won Silver Stars for that. And guys, when it comes to Jeff Adamek, I'm going to talk about Silver Stars as being the first guy in third group to get one, but these guys actually did it and earned it. It wasn't just thrown at them like it was at me. Hey, here you go, congratulations for surviving the invasion of Iraq. But these guys actually went out and did something inspirational that actually led on to such a big deal to have something in combat that actually they came up with the mission plan that morning. Dick Winters did. They executed it, and if you watch it, you can see so many things that are in there, like Buck Compton showing his baseball abilities by throwing the grenade that didn't arc, as the story goes, right at the German soldiers. Bill Garnier leading the way down those things, and even up to Lieutenant Spears doing the very famous crazy run into that last position. So I agree with you. It's one of my favorite parts of the show too.
And you aren't the only guy that recognized that. I mean, I think from what I've read in Bob Sink's, Colonel Bob Sink's, General Bob Sink later, and from what I've read in his personal papers, he recognized it, and he knew that was exceptional, and he wanted to make an issue of it. He wanted to give those people what they deserved because he knew, nobody else knew, but I think he did, that they weren't going to be pulled out and sent back to England to refit after the Normandy breakout. He knew they were going to continue.
Right.
And I think he said, well, I think I better show them right quick that performance like that gets recognized.
If you don't mind, I'd like to jump forward a little bit in the storyline. Another episode that your character participates in is in the episode "Why We Fight." We see Ron Livingston's character start to debate why he's there. His wife has left him. He's really starting to drink the Bat 69 a little bit too much to where you, Colonel Sink, demote him through major winners at the time. But the scene where you move in and you have to tell the men of Easy Company that they have to put the concentration camp prisoners back inside. The character, and I don't remember the actor's name at the time, but he's the one who plays Liebgot, the one that's interpreting Liebgot,
yeah.
the Jewish
Ross McCall.
His I tell you what, if there were Oscars, I mean, I know there were Emmys given, but if there were Oscars for TV performances, his job in that one episode, in my opinion, is one of the most fascinating because it's such a real emotional event. Can you talk a little bit about the filming of that scene and your thoughts about how difficult it must have been for those guys at that moment to know that they've got to put these people back?
Yeah, Ross McCall is one of my favorite actors. He's a British guy and a very close friend of mine these days. But he knew what was coming in that. And we had gone out of our way. I mean, we went and looked for people who were just rail thin with ribs showing and some of whom I think were very sick. But they wanted to be part of this. And so we hired them and brought them in to play prisoners in the camp. And that really helped. And we had built the ovens and that sort of thing. And what I did was, before we got ready to shoot this, I took the guys that were going to be involved, Liebgot, Ross McCall, and some of the others, and we sort of walked through it. And I said, gents, I want you to think about this. Think about how shocking this is just to see it now. Think about then, when these people were seeing what the true black heart of Nazism was.
Right.
And I want you to think about that, and I want you to chew on that before we get started here. And they did. I think it's one thing to read about it and to gasp at 3 million killed in these concentration camps, and it's another thing to see it on the ground and to let your imagination go and say, oh my God, think about what this must have happened, what must have happened to these guys. And then I knew that the human nature is, well, let's bring them out of there. Let's get them out of those cages and let's feed them and let's give them water and let's give them those things they need. Because that's human nature. I mean, that's what you want to do. You don't want to see anybody suffering like that.
Right.
And then I had to come in and say, gents, hold it. I know what you want to do. I know what you feel like you need to do, but if we do that, we'll kill these people.
Right.
And it was a tough thing for me to do because I can imagine what must have happened on the day in reality when they hit that camp. And everybody had seen the horrors of war, and now they were seeing an even more horrible aspect of war, or that particular war. And they wanted to help. They wanted to do something. They were desperate to do something. And here's their CO coming in and saying, "I'm sorry, we can't. We must not."
Yeah,
and
tough.
without a lot of time to explain it. So we got some great reactions from those guys when I came on and told them, no, you can't do this. You could see some expressions, and believe me, Spielberg didn't miss that.
Right.
He got the expressions on there. There was anger, there was disappointment, there was sadness, and you saw it all.
Right.
And I think it gave, even as weighty and with as much emotional impact as that whole episode had. I think the business of having to put them back in for their own good gave it extra gravitas, not only for the audience, but for us who were having to do it, who were having to depict it.
Right, and that's why I asked. You could see guys like Liebgott character actually looks like he's breaking down for real. The look of actual shock on Christensen, who was played by Michael Fassbender, his face standing there when you're telling them they've got to put the guys back. That's real.
It is.
And we know as combat veterans that, and it's an old adage, and people say it might even be just bullcrap, but it's not. We really do understand the horrors of war, probably more so than anybody that could watch it on television. And
that's not probably. That's exactly. That's precisely correct.
Yeah, I didn't want to throw anyone under the bus. I'll let you do that. But
okay.
But no, it's we understand it so much deeper, and to be able to see that on screen, and those are the moments like that, and the moments like in the Ardennes Forest when Carlton Lipton is talking about Toy and Garnier, and Compton walks up and has that moment. There's not a person that's ever been in a combat situation for an extended period of time who's lost buddies, who doesn't identify with Buck Compton's character. Yeah. When he's having his breakdown and he's in the hospital and he's reached that breaking point. And when Scott Grimes' character Malarkey comes in and wants to read to him to try to cheer him up, and him reaching over and grabbing that paper and he's like, stop. Back before combat experiences, I understood it. It never broke me down to actual tears until after I had my own struggles with PTSD after the point. Can you talk a little bit, as we're wrapping up here, about PTSD and how you were able to really get those guys to understand and show it so accurately, the effects of long-term exposure to combat on these American guys who really are just heroes just for tolerating it and having to handle that struggle and still move on and do their jobs?
Well, look, I did that a lot with storytelling. I let them see into my own heart. Look, I struggled with it for 10 years after my wartime experiences. But listen, PTSD, first of all, nobody knew what the hell that was.
Right.
And frankly, there's way too much of it now. It's become too easy a thing.
I understand. Yeah, I agree with you also.
You've got to learn to deal with yourself. Nobody's going to come out there,
right,
and pat you on the ass and tell you what a wonderful person you are beside all the devils that are crawling around in your head and your heart. You've got to be strong to deal with that, and you must deal with it yourself. You can't lay that off on some doctor or some shrink or somebody else. You've got to do it. And it's part of your duty. It's part of your mission as a soldier. And you must look at it that way. And that's the kind of thing I told them about. I told them about, being so sick with it at one point when I was stationed in Washington after the war that I actually drove my motorcycle into the wall of Arlington National Cemetery. How how blatant is that? How over the top is that? It's that kind of thing, and I just had to grip it. I had to grip it and grin. I had to get on with it, and that's what those guys did. Because if I didn't have any help, they sure as hell didn't have any back then. Right. They were tough individuals. They were, and that's what I told the guys. I said, look, it's going to hit you. It's going to hurt you. And you're going to have to deal with it. I mean, I will never forget the moment that I knew Buck Compton really understood it. And that's the moment that he takes his helmet off and he just drops it.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, and that was Neil McDonough. And Neil got it. He understood. I said, you have just said about 9 million words in one little action right there.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, great scene, and the lead up and the way it was filmed was perfect in my opinion, because it
Yep.
really did surmise everything that goes on. That we are a glass that is
You could
filling up
could
with water. And you can
see
only hold so much.
you could see the demons crawling around behind Buck's eyes
Right, right.
when he dropped that helmet. And I said, "Yep, that's it. He's got it." And that's a thing. I'm glad that we included it. Frankly, we didn't. It wasn't intentional to emphasize PTSD. It was just the effect that much death, especially people that you're close to around you, can have on you. And we wanted to show it, but we didn't want to, have a little guy ride by on a unicycle with a sign that said PTSD on it. I mean,
Right.
So we had to do it in the way that guys would have done it in those days, would have dealt with it in those days, and I think we did that.
No, you did very well done. So as we wrap up, I have one more question. So you talk about those guys back there being tough. What is the difference, if there is one, the generation of men and women of the World War II era than any before or since? We always hear the greatest generation. And do you, knowing have met those guys and working on shows like Band of Brothers, like The Pacific, which to me is just as great as Band of Brothers, do you find anything different in those generations that makes those people stand out from other generations that you
Yeah, America is different. Society is different.
Right.
It's easier to live now. There is a safety net in our society that didn't exist when those guys were young men growing up. It was hard scrabble,
right,
and they had to do what was necessary just to feed themselves. Growing up through the Depression and that sort of thing, they understood hard times. And I think we're much more capable of dealing with hard times. They were able to get out of themselves. They had learned through their experiences before the military to be selfless, to be tough, to be resourceful. And we're missing that today. So I think there is a difference.
Well said, sir. So as we close up here, I just wanted to remind everyone that Captain Dale Dye is not just a guy who used to do things. He's still working towards. Well, a lot of times everyone's always talking about, what did he used to do? But as you said, you're working on a new film now. Do you want to talk a little bit? I know you already mentioned it's about the 82nd, but do you have any other things or anywhere anyone can go to learn or?
Yeah, sure. You can look it up anywhere on the internet. But I think one of the interesting aspects of it is I have thought for a long time, Jeff, that America's veterans, especially veterans who want to get into show business in whatever aspect, writer, director, producer, actor, or working in one of the technologies behind the scenes, these guys aren't given enough credit. These guys and gals, by the way, aren't given enough opportunity. Hollywood still ignores them. They play a good game, but when it comes down to it, they don't get the shot they want. So I've decided with our new film, No Better Place to Die, I've decided to use as many genuine veterans in front of the camera as actors and behind the cameras as technicians as I can find. As many as I can find qualified. Now, granted, the top 3 roles in the film are going to have to be A-list actors, and I get that.
Right.
Or I won't get funded. But I'm going to try to populate the B roles, the secondary roles in the film, and as much of the filmmaking cadre as I can, using genuine veterans, really guys who understand this, guys and gals who understand this, so that the film will have that special nature of insight. And those guys and gals, those veteran guys and gals, will bring the kind of work ethic and the kind of selfless devotion to a mission to the film that they brought to to their missions while they were in uniform. So I think that's a little special aspect of what I'm doing.
That's awesome, and I think you're right on with so many guys that want to get into the entertainment industry.
I get hundreds of emails and phone calls a week.
I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do. I'm sure when you first got the email from me, the first thing you thought was, okay, what does this guy want? But warriorsinc.com, that is still your company's website?
Yeah, absolutely. It's up and running.
There's also, and there's the dog. There's a doggy in the background. So
yeah, I've got a golden Pyrenees that's 100-pound lap dog. He's huge.
I had a Dutch Shepherd in my last unit assignment in Special Forces, was as a dog handler. So I had a 110-pound Dutch Shepherd who was the same thing. He was a hard-nosed dog, found bombs, bit the enemy and everything like that, but he'd crawl up in your lap and be a lap dog for you.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I've got. You get it. Okay.
Yep. Duty and Dishonor, which is you have the author's preferred edition, which is now available.
Yeah, that's one of my 12 novels that are out. I'm also a writer, novelist. Duty and Dishonor is the newest book. That's the author's preferred edition. I think people really love that one. And the Shake Davis file series, which if you like Jack Reacher and Lee Childs and that sort of thing, it's along that line. So that starts with Laos File and goes on down into the most recent one, which I think is Havana File.
And those are available on warriorsinc.com?
Oh, yeah. They're available on Amazon, Warriors Inc. All you got to do is go to Dale Dye Books, and they'll all be there.
Fantastic. Well, Mr. Dale Dye, I want to thank you, sir, for taking time out of your schedule to come on with us.
Jeff, you're most welcome. It was a delightful conversation. Always great to talk to another veteran.
Lessons in Leadership, Band of Brothers is a production of Changing Hearts and Minds, hosted by Jeff Adamick on the Change Your POV podcast network. You can find other amazing shows on the network by going over to changeyourpov.com. Huge thanks goes out to all the amazing guests featured in the episodes of this series. First, our very own network hosts, Eddie Lazary and Bennett Tanton, hosts of Change Your POV podcast and Attack Friday. Dwayne France, host of Headspace and Timing, Andrew McDowell, host of Neophyte in the Woods, and our newest host, Benjamin Loth, hosting a show releasing soon called Branding with Benjamin. Special thanks goes out to some amazing podcast hosts who have donated their time and opinions to the series. Sam Culper of Breakers Podcast, Brad Taylor of Sofa Kings Podcast, Nick Giglio of Conspiracy Geeks Podcast, and last but certainly not least, to the man who probably had the biggest role in making Band of Brothers the series that it is today, a staple amongst military ranks and revered by all who have worn the uniform. Here's a huge salute to you, Captain Dale Dye. Owner of Warriors Inc., Dale also has a new film in the making and is planning on using veterans to be part of the cast and crew. To learn more about this and to get the links to all of the podcasts and podcast hosts mentioned, head on over to changeyourpov.com/Band of Brothers, all one word. If you like this series, share it with someone you think would like it too. Thanks for listening, and in the words of Dick Winters, I thank God for seeing me through the day of days and prayed I would make it through D+1. I also promised that if some way I could get home again, I would find a nice, peaceful town and spend the rest of my life in peace.